I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We've got Anjum Katyal, Jerry Pinto, and Arunava Sinha. Anjum has been involved with arts publishing for decades as an editor, writer, translator, and critic. She's the author of several books on theatre. Her published works include Habib Tanveer, Towards an Inclusive Theatre, Badal Sarkar, Towards a Theatre of Conscience, and Sacred to Profane, Writings on Worship and Performance. She was chief editor of Seagull Books from 1987 to 2006. Anjum has translated Habib Tanveer's Charandas Chor, Hirma Ki Amar Kahani, Bahadur Kalarin, as well as Usha Ganguly's Rudali, and stories by Mahashweta Devi and artist Meera Mukherjee. She is currently curator, New Festival of Arts and Ideas, Shantiniketan, and is the co-director of the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival. Jerry Pinto is a writer, editor, and translator. His works include the highly acclaimed award-winning novel, M and the Big Whom, several editor anthologies, and translations such as Sachin Kundalkar's Cobalt Blue, Baluta by Daya Pawar, and I, The Salt Doll by Vandana Mishra. He is a recipient of several awards, the Wyndham Campbell Award, the Sahitya Academy Award, the Crossword Award for Fiction, and the Hindu Lit for Life Award. His last novel, Murder in Mahim, won the REC VOW Award at the Dehradun Literary Festival, and his translation of Baburao Bagul's When I Hid My Caste and Other Stories won an award for fiction at the Bangalore Literary Festival. Arunava Sinha translates classic, modern, and contemporary Bengali fiction and non-fiction into English. He has translated more than 55 books from Bangla into English. His recent and forthcoming translations include Moom by Bani Basu, A Ballad of Remittent Fever, Ashok Mukhopadhyay, Shameless by Taslima Nasreen, and Khwabnama by Akhtar Uzman Alais. Arunava is Associate Professor of Creative Writing at Ashoka University and Books Editor at Scroll. Thank you all for joining me on this panel to talk about translation and inclusion.
Thank you, Rukmini.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure, our pleasure, in fact. Okay, so translation by its very nature is an act of inclusion or exclusion. In a country like ours, in a multicultural society such as India, where there are many different kinds of communities, there is plenty of scope for othering. There is also plenty of scope for inclusion. Here, decisions about what is being translated and how it is being translated really matters, for it has far-reaching consequences for certain communities. Now, I'd like to start by asking each of you, looking at translation through the lens of inclusion and diversity, can each of you talk about how you include inclusion, how you approach inclusion, I beg your pardon, in your own work? Can we start with Anjum?
Okay. Yeah, I think what you were saying about how translation in a very varied society does act as a kind of a bridge. You use these metaphors very often, a link, a bridge, and the fact that it can exclude as well as include. I think we have seen in our country, we've seen a lot of the exclusion part of it till maybe about 15, 20 years ago. I remember when I was in college, I was studying comparative literature, and you could really count on your fingertips the amount of decent translations of other Indian languages other than English that were available to students who wanted to study them or read them. So how do I include? I don't think I go deliberately out to choose a text from the point of view of inclusion. I think it becomes a reflection of my own interests. Because I like to read a variety of material, because I am very interested in what is happening in other parts of the country, in other socio-cultural backgrounds, I am greedy and hungry to read literature and writings written from people who are living in the South, in the North, in the Northeast, in the West, from different kinds of backgrounds. I want to know because I feel that they capture life and capture culture in a way that very little else can do. So when I'm reading, things hit me that I feel, oh, this is something I would love to work on. And that coupled with the opportunity to do it luckily for me, earlier on when I was with Seagull, we were working in certain areas where we were encouraged to translate. For example, we had launched Marshata Devi's selected work series. We needed text for those. We were also doing a lot of play scripts. So I started doing my Habib Tanveer stuff just like that on a suggestion, because I responded to him, I responded to the work, and he said, why don't you try? And I started doing it. So my answer to you, short answer would be that it's not a deliberate attempt at inclusion. It's not like an agenda. Chalo ab is baar hum is kitab ko karte hain because this book is by somebody who's been left out. But I think it becomes an extension or a reflection, if you will, of my own interests in reading and culture.
Right.
Yeah?
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Anjum. Arunabha, would you like to take that next?
Yeah. So I translate from Bangla, and Bangla literature for the longest time, I think, was dominated by the equivalent of the old white men whom you hear about when, especially I hear a lot of that from college students when they look at their syllabus, and quite correctly so. So the so-called canon has tended to be dominated by writers of a particular kind. And while it was not very cool for Bengalis to talk about things like caste and even economic status, the fact remains that when you look at it, you do realize that the writers who dominated the attention of readers and publishers were really they were caste. I mean, they were high upper caste people,
Right.
and they clearly came from some kind of privileged background, even if they were not exactly rolling in the stuff. But then, which Bengali is rolling in the stuff anyway? So yeah, so that at that point, I don't think there was too much thought. Not even for me. The focus really was on, okay, let's translate all the great books and the great writers. But over a period of time, after the first few years, it became obvious that the voices were similar in terms of, not in literary terms, but in terms of where they came from. And also that there was actually a thriving subculture of writing in Bangla, which deliberately stayed away from the mainstream press, or maybe was not accommodated by the mainstream Bangla press, whichever. And so this obviously became a source of books to investigate and see if there were interesting books there that could be thought about in terms of translation. At the same time, I also realized the tremendous gender inequality, how much of Bengali writing was dominated by men. So these were two streams that sort of formed a confluence in my mind, and I felt that maybe it was time to actually see if we could ensure that more voices from the less represented sections of writers can actually find homes in translation and then audiences in translation. So keeping that in mind, I've been trying to work on more, I mean, at a fairly broad level, I've been trying to work on more women writers and more writers who are not, who identify as not being upper caste. And this is important, that they choose not to identify as not being upper caste. And also writers who now say that, we will tell our stories and we don't need anybody else to come and tell our stories for us. So, so it felt necessary that perhaps whatever I can do to get these books out into the hands of readers in other languages, because English has the advantage not only of finding readers on its own, but also of arousing interest among publishers in other languages,
Yes.
both in India and the world.
Yeah.
So that's what I have actually, unlike Anjum, I have actually been trying to work consciously in translating the works of such writers. Not entirely successfully, but I've been trying.
Yeah. Arunabha, I just wanted to, can you give examples of a few books where, just names of a few books that you have translated where you have consciously looked at including women at, these marginalized groups? Just some examples.
Yeah. So as far as women are concerned, I think they now form a larger percentage of my translated books over the past few years. So I've translated works of Sangeeta Bandyopadhyay, who has been accused of being subversively profane. So I'm glad about that she carries those accusations. But I mean, it's a sort of intersection. So it would be great if I could also find women writers who identify as not being upper caste, but you have to try
Yeah.
and it's not always so simple.
Yeah.
So her, I've worked on Bani Boshu. I worked with on Navonita Debshen's works, and right now I'm translating something quite fascinating. It's a book in Bangla. It's called Ak Potita Nari Rapto Chorito, which, if you translate it very literally, would be the memoir of a fallen woman. So
Wow.
it was written in 1921, and it is, and scholars are not very sure whether it's actually an autobiography or whether there are large elements of fiction in it, but it's certainly based on facts, that's for sure. So it was written in 1921 by a woman who went under the name of Manoda Devi, and she talks about her life of being seduced by an older cousin and then being taken out of her house and then abandoned when she was pregnant. And then she had to come back to Kolkata, and she had no choice but to join become a sex worker, because that was the only trade, she said, where she was advised that she would not only get an income but also protection. Otherwise, as a woman who had been branded already as a fallen woman, she would be at the mercy of all kinds of predatory men. And then she talks about her life there and her interactions with men who are not only pillars of society, but also, very interestingly, young men who were part of the freedom movement at that time, and how there were these dual lives that many men led. So that's quite a fascinating work. Even if it's fiction, it's fascinating.
No, it sounds fascinating. And when is it coming out, Arnava?
Maybe later this year, or unless, of course, now publication plans may have changed.
Slightly
so
delayed,
it could get postponed. I don't know yet.
But I look forward to it. It sounds really fascinating. Thanks for that.
And then just a couple of writers who identify Dalit, Manoranjan Bapari, of course. And then there is another writer named Manohar Mouli Bishash, one of whose long poems I translated for Jagannath, the app. It hasn't come out in print yet, but I'm hoping to do more so that they can find a home for them. I'm also working on my own on an anthology of Dalit poetry from Bengali. I don't know if it will ever find a home with a publisher, but I'm working on it anyway. We'll see once it's done.
I'm sure it's going to find a publisher very easily. It sounds like something we'd want to very much read. So I think that's a lot of work that you're doing, and very consciously sort of situating yourself in, in a space where you are including and bringing.
Yeah, well, again, to be honest, I have to say I'm not sure I'm the best person to do this, because I do feel like an intruder in many ways. It's a translator who does not belong to the sections that they're working on. In some ways, is like the writer who sails in and writes about people, and then tells everyone, "Look what a great job I've done." But yeah, my hope is that also that there will be translators coming up from within the communities who will be doing this work as well. So maybe you need to seed it, and then others will take it up and carry on from there.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't see it as an intrusion. I mean, if at the moment,
I don't either. I think that's not a very pleasant way of looking at it at all.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is literary theory's current predicament. It's the desire to say that that everybody's got an agenda or some other such nonsense literary theory that's floating.
And the whole authenticity.
Imagine if Arthur Waley had not done Lady Murasaki. Would we be reading the tale of Genji now?
Yeah, exactly.
Genji right now, and I'm not worried that he's not Japanese, that he's white. We have to be able to. What is this identity politics coming to? If everything has got to be identity politics, if everyone has to be. I mean, unless you're a Dalit woman, then you can translate a Dalit woman.
No, I agree.
Woman, you should translate Dalit woman. And if there are no translators, then let all the Dalit women remain silent. This, in fact, is exclusionary.
No, fair enough. I'm not going that far. I'm just saying that
and especially when we have started this discussion by saying that, the two of us are outsiders. I am an outsider to the Marathi tradition. I am an outsider to the Hindi tradition. And suddenly I am confronted with the idea that, you've come in and you're saying what a great job I'm doing. Why would I be doing?
I wanted to just say something. I totally know where Jerry is coming from. This whole authenticity thing is a very old one. Who speaks for whom?
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to the blacks also, and it's very. It keeps coming up. I think there's a very there's a balance that has to be walked between over-representing somebody and accepting the fact that sometimes people are capable of translating a work with great sensitivity and respect, which even though they may not belong to that very same background or community. And in fact, I was going to point out to something about Arunava's work on this line of representation and inclusion, which is that he has also been looking at Bangla works, which have been done by Muslim writers, Bangladeshi writers, and for whom Bengali is a language they completely identify with and own. It's not necessarily seen that way this side of the border always, or even if it is this side of the border, there is a tendency not to automatically associate the Muslim identity with Bengali language. And I think Arunava has been doing a great job by actually bringing out some wonderful works written by people who come from a different cultural context, but who own the language and who write in that language. So that's the comment I was going to make about his list of translations of that.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to respond to what Jerry and Anjumi are saying, which is that, no, you're right. I'm not saying that no one else is allowed. I'm just saying it would be a good idea if translators also came out.
Yeah.
That's all.
You know, the problem
and,
is there are no translators at all. I would rather not be translated. But I don't see anybody else doing it.
No,
I just don't see people translating. I know hundreds of people who are bilingual, effortlessly bilingual, and who don't translate. And then when you translate, they come along and they say things like, Dalit people should translate Dalit people, women should translate women, Dalit women should translate Dalit women. Oh, yeah, sure. Then why not do it?
They do it?
Yeah,
why don't they do
then?
it? Yeah,
exactly.
So annoying.
No, and now they are
thrown at you at a certain level, and a politics of exclusion in a panel called Belong. And by the way, Team Belong, all the people sitting on this panel have translated into English.
That's right.
Thereby enriching the pool of English. And is there Orientalism in Dogri? Can you, if you are a Dogri speaker who does not read English, can you read Edward Said's Orientalism?
Yeah, I see your point.
You are a Tulu speaker. What access do you have to the world's knowledge? Is that part of an inclusion, or is that not part of our inclusion?
But Jerry, just to say that earlier on, in the 40s, in the 50s, there was a huge tradition of translating from one Indian language to another. I know so many people who've told me that they read their first classics in Hindi, or Bengali books in Malayalam. And so, I mean, I know that this was a very, very active stream in our cultural history. And it's a very rich thing, which, I mean, I'm not sure, I don't know enough about Hindi publishing, or I know in Bengali, the translation field still continues into Bengali of major works. Arunava, isn't that true?
No, not anymore, sadly. In fact, Kannan Sundaram, who publishes Tamil books, was saying the other day that it's been many years since he's had a request for a Tamil book to be translated into Bangla.
Okay. But it was a very rich tradition. I know because I've spoken to so many people who've grown up reading.
That's dying, In fact, that's a point, Jerry and Anju, that we may want to talk about at some point, which is whether English can be used or any other language can be used as a bridge language or not.
Yeah, if you don't mind my taking up on that, there is actually a project, actually a series, which was based on precisely this premise, which is a series of plays called the New Indian Playwright Series, where we realized, this is going back to the 90s, we realized that there was a paucity of access amongst theatre people to works written in different languages, which they might want to, they might want to actually do. They might want to actually produce and put up. And what we did was we started this whole almost like a relay, where you go from the original language into English so that other people in the other languages could access it and put it into their own languages. And it really worked. there were so many people who accessed the play, liked the idea of what they were reading, and then did it in their own languages. And so this is something, Arunava, that definitely I think can work as a model. It can become a way of helping people. Hey, I didn't know that this work existed or this writer existed, and then try and put it into a language that is more common in their area.
Yeah.
So this movement that you were talking about, Anjum, in the 40s and 50s of translations, which I don't know why you are now saying has kind of sort of decreased or sort of tapered off or whatever. Why is that happening? Why aren't people, why didn't that sustain a movement that you were talking about? Why do you think this is happening? Why are people not interested in other languages? What is it that?
Well, I think, I'm a complete layman answering this question. I'm not a business person or whatever, but my guess would be that there was a much greater demand. People were reading in their own languages, and they were reading serious work in their own languages. And so they wanted access to material. They wanted to be able to read important, valuable, iconic works in their own languages, because that's what they naturally read. That has decreased over time. No, English has become more the language which people are accessing before they access their own mother tongues, not in the spoken language, but certainly in reading. I think even amongst Bengalis, who are probably one of the last stalwarts, or even Marathis, the last bastions of people who want to hold on to their literature in their own languages. Yet less and less young people are reading in Bangla, I think. I don't know. Arunava might be able to answer this better. Or Jerry, what do you feel about young kids growing up with Marathi as a first language? Do they prefer to read that, or they prefer to read in English?
I have no idea, Anjum. I really have no idea. How would I know? This is the point. I think also translators sometimes are seen as arbiters of many other factors in the socio-cultural sphere. I don't know what Marathi young people are doing. I only know that when I did Baluta, Daya Pawar's autobiography, Pratna Daya Pawar on stage thanked me because she said, now my son can read what his grandfather wrote. Now, am I to take this as anecdotal evidence, or am I to take this as a statement that is to be applied to all Maharashtrian children? I don't know. I really don't.
Yeah.
And, is there a question you have for Rukmini? Or,
yes, actually, Jerry, the question that I had asked Arunava and Anjum a while ago, can we talk about inclusion in your work? Is it there? Is it deliberate? You've done
I don't know, after all this discussion now, suddenly, Rukmini, I don't know, I feel that the ground has been cut away from under my feet, and I don't know how I can speak actually, but I'm going to give it a try. Okay, what I'm going to say is this. No one seems to have mentioned the fact that translators don't get paid very much. So what you're doing is amortizing the cost of translating from your own pocket, right? So if you get paid, say, 30,000 rupees for a translation or translating a book, and you've taken a year for it, then it's like about 2,000 rupees a month that you've been paid to translate that book, to give that time to the book, which is fine. You're doing it. Now, why are you doing it? Why would you do this? You would do this out of love. It's this very simple thing. You love that book.
Yeah, totally.
It's not that you love the identity politics around the book. It's not that you love, you're not doing anybody a favor. You're responding to a need inside you that says, this book needs. Actually, I don't even know if you're talking about book. You're thinking to yourself, I need to do this book because it's worrying me inside my head. Because suddenly now it's like a little worm inside my head saying, how would you say that? How would that move across? How would that be translated? The lines are playing inside your head, and you begin working even when you're not working on it. So you'll be cooking or walking or talking to somebody, and you'll suddenly say something like that opening line from Cobalt Blue. Are you saying at that point, this is an LGBT novel and therefore, it needs to be translated? No. But once it is done, and you discover that, you've done 2 or 3 Dalit writers who've just done magnificent books that you feel challenged by, that you want to engage with. And remember, translator engages with a book in a deep, intimate, passionate relationship at the level of every word, at the level of, at that micro level, that intense micro level of like, what does this word not just mean, but what does it connote? And what could it possibly connote to that person at that particular time? And you're working at the macro level as how did this book fit into the sphere, into the larger sphere of where it was, and what does this metaphor mean at this time to this sort of person? Your relationship with it is sometimes almost like you dream the book in the night. You're dreaming the words and the phrases. That's the only thing I can say. So in this mess, in this maelstrom of emotion that you feel when you're translating, when you step out and you finished and the book comes out and someone asks you questions about it, you tell a story. You tell a story about what the book means, what the book is, but it's nothing. It's exactly the same as trying to write a description of a love affair that has ended. You will always produce only a pale, faint, imaginary, ephemeral description of the intensity of the moment that it was. So whatever I have said about my translations, I have meant, I have believed, but that has never been very even close to the intensity of the connection that you feel with the book and with the writer when you are doing the work. In that work. And therefore, you know, when you see someone with your translation, you think you're only holding the ghost of it. I went through the real life experience of that book. That book was like vibrant and it was me for that period of time. It was who I was. And now you're reading some imitation of it. It's an incredible thing. Now, all this I am trying to explain in terms of did I feel that I'm doing a great job by doing Dalit translation, or did I feel that I'm doing a great job by talking about peripheral people like stage actors who are denied their rights in society? I don't know. I understand that there might be a very valid set of discussions around this theme. They're not my discussions. My discussions are discussions of intimacy with book. That is where I come from. That is my connection. And so tomorrow I might discover a book written by a Brahmin male that I really want to translate. Will I deny myself that joy because I say, Jerry, all this time Dalits, all this time women, now don't do Brahmin males? I don't think so. I hope not. I hope not. And and the last thing that I'm going to say is every book that is translated is a choice not to translate many other books. So every act of inclusion implies acts of
exclusion. Yeah.
And the only thing I can say to all of you out there who say, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you finished that? Why haven't you also done this? Can you consider as poems? Did you do only one novel? Why didn't you do the other novel of his? I'm saying, please join the team. Let's all do this together.
Yeah.
You can't just stand on the sidelines saying, you should translate, you should translate, you should translate.
Yeah.
I know I should translate. I'm doing it. You should translate too. Join in. Okay, you can fail. Fail honorably, but start. What about you, Rukmini? Do you translate?
No, I don't. But after hearing you talk, I'm thinking about it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, what am I doing?
There you go, Jerry.
Jerry's pepped me up so much. I'm going to sort of end this conversation.
You walk out of your girl and you go find yourself the right text and you get going.
But I love Jerry's response. I mean, it's very, very real. It's very honest. It is what it is.
But that's Jerry, He's always real and always honest.
Translate what it is that you love. I mean, you enjoy something, you want to bring it out into another language. And so it's coming from the heart, really. And that is the way it truly is. Which doesn't mean that, Arunava's response or your response, they're all all of it makes sense, when you're talking about it together. Jerry, you wanted to share a fable at the start of, you don't want to do it now?
I don't think it works now.
Are you sure? You might...
Yeah. Let's go on. Let's just stop.
Or at any point, if you want to...
Can I, just to play devil's advocate, Arunava, all this passion and intimacy, I remember being on a panel with you at the Jaipur Lit Fest where you had the completely other take on this. You want to share that?
What about passion and intimacy?
Yeah, and how you have to be in love. Remember, I was saying it's like a love affair, and you said you were sort of putting me in my place with your characteristic humor by showing how exactly it is not that.
What did I say?
What is it, Arunava? What is it then?
अरे रात
Translated-
भरी बात भई
translate-
उस वक्त कहा था अभी क्या कहें.
Translators are full of metaphors for what they do. So they go from metaphor to metaphor, and we never remember. And we flick from book to book.
Yeah, no, I found it actually very interesting because Arunava does translation in, I think, a much more sort of whole-time sense than many of us do. I'm not. Jerry does other things. He's teaching. He's communicating all the time with people. Plus, he's writing his own work. You know, his own creative work. And I
That's
do
something I
other
really.
things as well.
That's something I really am in awe of. The fact that Jerry both writes his own books and translates, which is also writing your own book, but in a different way.
So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm completely in awe of that fact, because as a translator, I feel I would never be able to come up with the words unless they existed in another language somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. So,
That's
and
great,
just to
right?
go back to what Arunava was taking issue with, because I'm starting with this premise of how, just as Jerry was saying, that it's a passionate love affair. You fall in love with the text, and it's like uncovering a relationship right from the beginning when you're first getting to know the text and the excitement of possibilities, and then the intimacy as it grows deeper, and you learn to understand the language and the rhythms and the silences and all this, you see. And then Arunava says, no. I don't agree with any of this rubbish. I think that translating a text is nothing like a love affair. It's actually like something completely different, like a sort of a liaison. Or
And it was
you
like
don't
an
have to
arranged
get.
marriage.
In fact, no. I remember now. He said you don't have to get involved with the text. In fact, you should not get involved with the text. You should keep a distance. And immediately, I'm thinking, that's a good point. So you
Okay,
have
so
both.
on that
Jerry is
note,
looking
then-
aghast now, absolutely
No,
aghast.
no. I think there are times when, like in love affairs, the text will let you down, right?
Oh my
Recently,
God.
I translated Muktabai. Muktabai is a Varkari saint poet, 13th century, magnificent woman. She looks at God straight in the eye. She's not one of those bhakts who's at his feet, who's like completely devotional. She's obviously the most Advait of the bhakti poets I've read. And she had this magnificent poem, which is Mungi Udali Akashi, which is the title of the book that Neela Bhagwat and I did together, The Ant Who Swallowed the Sun. So it's an ant flew into the sky, and she swallowed the sun. And I remember the first time I heard that poem, and I remember thinking,
Yeah.
my gosh, this is a metaphor for what it might. No, 1 minute, hold on. I thought this is a little girl kneeling in the grass and picking up a small black ant gently and holding it up to the sun and closing one eye and letting it completely eclipse the sun. Then I thought, no, this is the swallowing of God, epiphany. When God appears to you, it's like lava and it's like gold melting down your throat, an ant who swallowed the sun. This is the miracle of God in your life. And then the next few lines is, and the barren gave birth to a son. And I went to Shanta Gokhale, who is one of my gurus in translation. I said, can I say child? Can I say the barren woman gave birth to a child? And she said, what does the text say? So I said, the text says putra, son. She said, then it is son. The barren gave birth to a son. And I thought, why, Muktabai? Why can't you just say, why can't a barren woman give birth to a child? Why does the miracle have to be a son? And Muktabai across the ages answered me and said, have you read the Bible recently, Jerry? When Abraham and Sarah give birth, do they give birth to a daughter? No. When the Shunammite, who set up a place for the prophet, when she gave birth, did she give birth to a daughter? She gave birth to a son. I'm part of a tradition, Jerry. My tradition you will not cancel out with your politics. My barren woman gives birth to a son. It's my poem. But out. So I put the barren woman gave birth to a son. It's not something that I wanted to do, but I did it because that's what the poem demanded. So love affairs can also disappoint you. Love affairs can break your heart sometimes. But we will continue. You will work on it. You will work with, because there are other joys. Suddenly, there are other joys and other things that come up, grief and sorrow. both are sisters born of ignorance. Actually, like, when you stumble onto that, it's such magic that you don't mind the disappointments. And that really, Blake, joy and grief is woven fine, a fabric for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silk and pine. You don't go into anything after you're an adult expecting it to be only joy. You know there will be some work, you know there will be some pain, you know that there will be some disappointment. You will work with that. All the books I have translated have talked about skin color. Always, always, always a mention of fair skin, dark skin, fair skin. Do you think I like doing that? I want to see, stop it. Why is skin color? But it is an obsession. It is a national obsession. You translate it.
So how inclusive, I mean, we're talking about inclusion, but how inclusive can you finally be, or do you choose to be? What is left out? What is bound to be left out because of many reasons, because of the limitation of language, or...
Can I tell you my fable now?
Yes, absolutely.
Once upon a time, there was a country called Monolingua. Everyone in that country read, spoke, talked, heard the same language, and they were fine. They loved their country, they loved their language, they enjoyed it, but they felt something was missing. So they went to their oracle, who was a wise woman, and they said, what do you think is missing? Why do we feel that there's something wrong with our lives? And she said, you need salt for your language, and it is salt that comes from across the river of meaning, which flows past Monolingua. It is salt that you have to bring from Multilingua, which is across the river. And so one of the young men, who was called a translator, decided that he would set out and bring salt from Multilingua. He got to Multilingua across the very fast-flowing river of meaning, and Multilingua, they said, yes, you can take salt back, but our rule is you can only build a boat of our salt and put it in the river and sail across the river in that boat of salt and take it to your people. So he said, okay, if that's what I have to do, then that's what I have to do. He built a boat of salt, he put it into the river, he put it and rowed passionately and desperately across the river. When he got to the other side, he had a handful of salt in his hands. And the people of Monolingua said, only this much salt? And he said, yes, only this much salt, but I'm going again. That's what gets left out. Everything. A handful of salt is what we have. But take it. You need it. Your life will be immeasurably richer with this handful of salt. And stop asking how much did you drop? How much? Because no one knows better than a translator how much is left behind and how much is excluded. No one. Every translation discussion that I've had, someone will stand up and say, but a lot of the local color and a lot of the flavor of the language is lost. And you feel like saying, and of course I'm polite, I'm very polite. Sorry, this afternoon, it's a Sunday afternoon and I'm not as polite as I normally would be. But on this, in generally, I just say, yes, I know how, it's terrible, isn't it? But I want to say, like, you're telling me that you lost meaning? Of course I know you lost meaning. Of course I know, like, I mean, okay, in that same Muktabai poem, there is a moment where she says, the scorpion burrowed into the underworld. Now, the scorpion in Sanskrit aesthetics is about passion. It's about unfulfilled passion. How am I going to get that into the scorpion in English, which is about Scorpio, which is about a certain measure of astrology, a certain measure of Gerald Durrell, a certain measure of other things? How do I bring that your scorpion, Muktabai's scorpion, to the English scorpion? I can't, but I'm going to have to hope. I'm going to work with hope. Writers are optimists. I'm hoping, Arunava is hoping, Anjum is hoping, all of us are hoping that even as we talk to each other, we'll assume value and we'll take the best from each other, right? In this act of communication, there is hope that even that we are talking to other people who will take what we are saying in the best possible light, right? All of this is that hope. Writers are hopeful because they have an imagined audience, and translators are doubly and triply hopeful that you will step in with your resources and understand what we are doing.
And if I can just say something, picking up on what Jerry was saying, even when we're having a face-to-face conversation between two people, there is so much that is lost between what I'm trying to say, what the other person's picking up, the preconceptions that come in the way. So just to put it only on translation, this burden
Yes.
of loss, lost in
Correct.
translation. Lost in translation happens all the time across live communication, across even in the same language. So I think that is something that we learn to live with. And like you said, you take the salt that you've got and you value
Tintin,
that because,
Asterix.
yes.
Was that Jerry? Sorry, could you repeat that?
Tintin and Asterix. You wouldn't have
Tintin and
Tintin and
Asterix.
Asterix if you didn't have translation.
Yeah.
Count your
Exactly.
games.
Yeah. No,
Borges,
absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Garcia
absolutely.
Marquez, Akhmatova, Basho,
Yeah.
Kikuyu,
Quite right.
Lady
And
Murasaki.
from absolutely from childhood onwards, yeah. I mean, the classics that we grew up reading, even like you said, Tintin, Asterix, there's so many things that shaped our world and way of thinking.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot was lost in translation. I'm sure that people accessing it in the original language had a very different experience of it.
But
I
does
remember
that
feeling
mean we
this a
would
little
not
bit when
translate? No, it does not mean that we would not translate.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
to do what you're doing. It has to be done because it's very, very
See,
beautiful.
it very interestingly, I remember when Salman Rushdie's Negotiation came out, and I got so many responses from my friends in the US and the UK saying that, man, it's full of all sorts of illusions. We can't understand a lot of it. We feel as if we're so left out, and we feel disoriented, and we're reading English, but it's not quite that. And I realized that what was happening with them was what was probably happening with us all along. But we're getting a sense that we're missing a lot of stuff, but we're going with the general flow. We're being able to access most of it. We're getting something very out of it, which is ours. People get something of their own out of it. I we learn to live with imperfection, like Gary said. Once we're
Yeah.
adults, we
Yeah.
accept that there's going to be loss, there's going to be everything mixed up in the package.
I think Jerry's fable is
Sorry, we've
beautiful.
become very philosophical.
No, and why not? Why not? But I think the fable is beautiful. You come back with this much salt, and my God, there is this much salt, and that's very precious. So why are you worrying about the fact that there was?
You will take that salt and immediately translate a book. So then, good. You can relieve me of the pressure of anybody having to look at me, and I'll just talk.
Oh no, we were having a perfectly wonderful time now. That's not fair. But anyway,
Just
we've got
kidding,
your
I'm just
voice at
kidding.
least. I know. Okay, I have a question. I just want to sort of take this forward a little bit. Jerry, I want to ask you this. Who are you when you are translating a work? Do you try to inhabit the author's presence as much as possible? Do you remain Jerry translating? Are you Jerry the author who's translating? Do you let the author inhabit you as much as possible? Who are you when you are translating?
I don't really know that there's an answer to that, Rukmini, that is like, fixed, because I have a great suspicion of these, of role playing, because I think one moves in and out. So there is often a time when you will let yourself slip in a little. But as soon as you've done that, what I find is that in my edit, because I do 5 edits on every translation, at least 5 edits before it goes out of my control, and then it goes to the publisher who does another edit. And then there's if the author is alive, then he wants to, or she sometimes wants to have a look, then that's fine with me. They get a look in as well. All of that happens, and then it goes through. And I think most of the time when I'm reading, the last reading is I give a few months before I leave it for a few months and then read it as if it were a book, someone else's book. And if I smell myself in those pages, I remove that. I cut it out, because I feel this is not about Jerry. This is about that. See, if a reader puts down his or her money, more than his money, for a book, it's because they want to read about Daya Pawar. I'm just the channel, I'm not significant out there. If tomorrow they are buying M and the Big Boom, A Murder in Mime, A Prayer for Felicia, one of my novels, sure, they're buying it for me, and I can be myself there, I can relax.
Sure.
So there's a much greater awareness of the idiolect, the self-idiolect of the self, like how Jerry would write that sentence. And there is a greater awareness of what, like often I find that there is a word repeated in 2 sentences, then I would not allow that of myself. But I go back to the original text and see, has she or he repeated the word twice in 2 sentences? It may be, if it is there, then I will do it here. If it is a synonym, then I will find a synonym here. Because I'm okay, there's that old horrible thing about beautiful and faithful. A translation can either be beautiful or faithful, and there's some misogynistic thing about women also. It's like, translations like a woman, she can either be faithful or beautiful, but not both at the same time. I don't believe that nonsense. I believe you can be faithful and you can be beautiful. You can strive. You can never acquire. You can never be 100% of what the original book is, but you can try to be close. So that close is very important to me. I know that close is a failure. I know that it is already like it's the cultural setting is different, the understandings are different, all that. But I still believe I believe that this transcreation business is true. Every translation is a transcreation. But if the translator sets out saying it is a transcreation, then she or he is on a slippery slope already. And you'll end up writing your version of this, which is fine. Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson is a version of Frankenstein, which is fine. It's lovely to read that after you've read Frankenstein and to read 5 other versions. But if in a translation, I don't think it's about versions. I'm not making this a prescriptive thing. I'm not saying everybody should be like this. The wonderful thing about the human experience is its variability and its differences, right? So I'm not saying now everybody be Jerry Pinto's view of translation. I'm saying this is my view of translation. I'll try to be faithful. I'll try to be beautiful as well.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Arunava and Anjum the same thing as well. Arunava, how do you work with your text? I mean, how do you negotiate? How do you work?
That's a very broad. I mean, that's all I do. I work with the text.
No, but how do you sort of, the same question that I'd asked Jerry, how much are you, you're an editor, you're a translator, you're a writer. How do you navigate, those voices in your head when you're working with your text?
No. So as a translator, and that's the whole point. It's not to be myself at all. There's no me in there. There's just as far as possible. Now, obviously, you cannot completely wish yourself out of the picture, because translating is an act of reading. So who you are does determine how you read the text and what you make of it. And what you make of it, what you hear in your head is what you're going to try and put into the words in the new language. So there's no getting around that. Anyone who reads translation that I've done is still reading what I've read. The question is, my attempt there is to get the reader to read what I read. What I read from the text in its first language is what I'm hoping a new reader will read from the text that I've written in the other language. But in doing that, of course, I have to not be a writer. I have to put in any of the ways of writing that I have my own. But I find that if you are translating regularly, you almost stop being a writer. That's why I was saying I'm in awe of Jerry that he can pull off both, because I am not a writer at all. I except in a very different space. So the kind of books I translate are not the kind of book I would ever write. So here I'm listening. When I'm reading, I'm listening and I'm reproducing what I'm listening. And how well or badly I can do that is all a matter of my abilities or the lack of those abilities. And when I reread the text that I worked on, I am only trying to see whether I'm still reading the same thing that I read in the original text. Now that reading may be completely off. I don't know what that reading is, So that's why I'm also chary of the term lost in translation, because that somehow implies that there is one unshakable, definitive version of the original text because it exists in the language in which it was first written. And there can be no other version in that language, which is patently untrue. I mean, when I read a 20-year-old or 30-year-old or 50-year-old text, I'm not going to be reading the same text at all from the time that contemporary readers read it, right? There's a glorious story by Borges. You know that story, Jerry and Anjum? The man who rewrote, it's about a man who rewrote Don Quixote. And he rewrote Don Quixote word for word, exactly the same words in the Spanish language. And yet they meant something completely different, completely.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, absolutely, because context makes the way you read it, even the age at which you're reading a work. When you read something at 14 and you read it again at 30, the whole work can be different. It's the same
Yeah.
book, but it's very different.
Yeah, so
But
the translator
if you
should
want,
not be out of the
sorry.
picture. But the translator has to try to be out of the picture in as much as the writing is concerned.
Yeah.
But as far as the reading goes, there's no getting around it. It is the
Yes,
translated reading.
that's very well said. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, yeah.
Anjum, what is the process like for you when
Right.
you're
Well,
translating?
it's kind of similar to what Arunava was saying, in the sense that I don't think I mean, because I'm working with a text that's so very different from me and the way I write, it is a different way of looking at things or expression or language. I tend to try and enter that language. And for me, it's the language, it's the style, it's the way the person has used the language. Like Jerry was talking about repetition, silences, gaps, elisions. These things to me are very, very much part of the work. So I try to enter that as much as I can. And where I come into the picture naturally, just as Aruna was saying, is just by virtue of my own upbringing. You know, the way I have read, the kind of cultural references I may have, the things that come to mind when I read something are going to always be, sort of mediated by everything that forms me as a human being, right? So if I have access to certain kinds of cultural references, those are the cultural references that will resonate when I'm thinking of similes or metaphors or similarities, you know. So it's not a conscious attempt to either put myself in or take myself out when I'm translating, but it's more like a kind of a focus on what is this writer actually trying to say here? How is the writer saying it? You know, what is important about the way he or she is trying to write this out? And another thing is that a lot of the work I've translated are, a lot of the pieces I've worked on are play scripts. And in the play script, what you're really, really focusing on is voice. And as soon as you start focusing on voice, it's a very different ball game, because there is it's very, very fine and subtle, and you have to also constantly imagine it, hear it in your head, hear it being said. So here you're taking something that happened in one kind of cultural context and you're trying to make it viable in another, but just at the oral level. So that's it's again very interesting, because I'm not part of those cultural contexts. If I'm translating Charan Das Chor, I'm not a Chhattisgarhi. I have not even been to Chhattisgarh. I've not necessarily grown up with the language and those rhythms in my head. So it's not a question of putting myself in, as I said. It's more like trying to focus on what's coming across there and how best do I do it in a different language.
Thank you very much for that, for
Yeah.
all of your responses, Arunava, Jerry, Anjum. Thanks very much for that. Before we move to there are some audience questions. I want to just ask you, we were talking about this before the conversation actually started. What are all of you working on right now? I think all of you are sort of working on translating things. Arunava, you talked about the fact that you're working on something. Can you just share that for the audience?
Yeah, well, I'm working on 2 books actually. I usually tend to work on more than 1 book at a time, because sometimes you just need a change of gear.
Yeah.
So yeah, one is the book that I was talking about. It's a book from 1921, which claims to be, may not, claims to be the memoir of a woman who joined who became a sex worker. She came from an upper caste Brahmin family. She was seduced by a cousin, then abandoned when she became pregnant. She lost the child, and then for reasons of security, income security as well as personal security, she joined. She became a sex worker, and then it talks about her experiences. And scholars say that it may be part fiction, but it's nevertheless a very fascinating document in many senses, especially because she makes no bones about desire being a very strong part of her personality. So she does not even try to explain away her choices as merely being, becoming a victim of circumstances. She
That's very empowering. That's incredible.
My desire could have taken me along any road, and the fact that it took me on this road, of course, had a lot to do with my circumstances. But the desire was very much there. Without that, I would not have stepped on any of these roads. So that's one. The other one is a novel by Manoranjan Bapadi, which in Bangla is called Chhera Chhera Jibon. So loosely you could call it a tattered or life in tatters or a tattered life. It's got a very interesting premise. It tracks an 18-year-old boy who spent the first 18 years of his life in jail, not because he was a criminal, but because he was a baby in his mother's arms when she went into jail for murdering her husband. And she died 2 years later in jail. And the baby was at that point 2 years old and obviously could not be let out into the world. No one came to claim him. And no one came to claim him at all throughout his childhood. So the rules say that you can be let out, therefore, only when you become an adult, which is 18. So at 18, for the first time, this boy actually steps out into the so-called free world from a space which he's very comfortable in, where he knows his daily meals are assured and he's got his own community and friends. And it is the life of, it's not just his life. So his life collides, or rather his trajectory collides with the lives of people who live in shanties next to a railway station and whose battle for a livelihood is extraordinary, the kind of thing that they have to do. For example, very early on, one of the big scenes depicts three men claiming a dead body in order to be able to make some money off it in different ways. First, by placing it near a shrine to get passers-by to put coins on it, and then by taking it to a morgue to sell it there. So you can imagine this is the it's a whole socio-economic system that we have no awareness of. We meaning those of us who live in the privileged part of the world. So yeah, those are the two books.
They both sound fascinating, Arunava.
Yeah,
Jerry, what are you working on right now? Can you share that?
So last draft of Maine Mandu Nahi Dekha, ek Khandit collage by Swadesh Deepak. Swadesh Deepak, I think it shames me that I had no idea that this story, that one of our finest Hindi writers one day got up, left his home, and vanished forever into the large, I don't know, soundscape of India. So Swadesh Deepak had a nervous breakdown, and he spent 7 years not writing at all. He tried to kill himself several times, and then he was admitted to the Chandigarh AIIMS. And when he recovered after a really serious bout of shock therapy, his friends, Gagan Gill, Nirmal Verma, people like that, asked him to write his memoir of this time. And he sat down and wrote Maine Mandu Nahi Dekha. It came out, and it was received with a great interest in the Hindi-speaking world. And then one day, I think the symptoms recurred. The feeling came back that he'd never write again. And he just got up, left his home, and vanished forever. I discovered this book, and this is how books produce books, and how I think for me, therefore, my writing and my translation are not very easily separable. After M and the Big Home came out, I edited a book called The Book of Light, which is about the families of people who have lived with someone who has a different mind. And one of the last essays that came into that book was Swadesh Deepak's son, Sukant Deepak, writing about his father. When I discovered the book and I started reading it, I just fell into it. The first 30 pages or so are just a description of one evening of conversation with Nirmal Verma, Gagan Gill, Vikas Rai, Krishna Sopti, and Swadesh Deepak. I mean, it's like being a fly on the wall in a Hindi literary salon. It's like a dream that I've always had. So I came home and I was only halfway through the book, and I was on Facebook at that time. I got onto Facebook and on Facebook Messenger, can you believe it? I sent a message to Sukant saying, you must translate your dad's Maine Mandu Nahi Dekha. And he wrote back saying, it's too personal, I can't do it. And before I could stop myself, I was writing back, then may I do this? And he said yes. And I just tumbled into the book immediately. It was an incredible book. And so because I felt there was such a close relationship between Swadesh Deepak's real world and his imagined worlds, I thought we must bring out this book with his short stories in English and his plays in English, so that these two books can speak to each other. So that a reader who wants to just read about the mental health, condition that Swadesh Deepak went through and his life can just stay with the Mandu book. But if they want a fuller understanding of that book, they should be able to read the short stories and the plays, which are tremendous. So Sukant's done some of the short stories. Nirupama, that wonderful Punjabi playwright, has done one of the plays. I've done one of the plays, and both these books are coming out soon, and I'm just doing the finishing touches on that.
That sounds amazing. All the best for it, Jerry. Thanks
Thank
very
you so
much.
much.
Before we hear from Anjum about her work, I just want to tell you one of the things I'm very excited by, which is that for my students at Ashoka University, many of them are translating, and they're translating from Tamil, Bengali, Hindi, Malayalam, Kannada, and three of their works have already been accepted by different publishers.
That's terrific. That is terrific.
Yes, absolutely
really
brilliant news, Arunabha.
That is really terrific.
Hats off to you, Arunabha.
One from
All is forgiven. Come
Yeah.
home. Daddy's serious.
Now
Mommy missing you.
we're going to look for people.
yeah.
I was just saying now we.
Jerry's just saying she all is forgiven. Come home, Arunabha.
Yeah, no, I was saying that now we'll also wait for people who start translating into their own languages.
Yes,
Yes,
that is
that's
exactly,
true.
that's exactly one of the things I was going to do this semester. Unfortunately, we're not going to be on campus for some time, which is to set up these pairs and make them translate works from each other's mother tongues into their own. So a pair, a Hindi speaking person with a Tamil speaking person, and make them translate works so that they would help each other.
That's wonderful. That's really good work.
But I still hope to do that next year.
Sorry, Anjum, very quickly before we move to the question.
Yeah, that's a
what are
great
you working
exercise.
on? Yes, it is actually.
Are you asking me, Anju? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
no, your voices are all getting a little scrambled now. I
sorry.
feel like I'm in a Soviet plot. No, what I was just saying that about my own work at the moment, what I've been working on, and it's actually all been lockdown period work, that this particular aspect of it is I've just been trying to complete a book on the theatre of Safdar Hashmi, Safdar Hashmi and Janam, the street theatre group. And so as part of that book, I also wanted to translate some of their very, very iconic plays, the sort of landmark plays that they had done. And it's very interesting because these plays are street theatre plays, but they all happened at a time in the mid 70s to around between about 78 to 88, when street theatre was in some ways quite different, and it was very fresh at that time. When you read them now, that freshness is no longer that obvious. So one of the tasks was to try and make it as contemporary sounding, that because theatre, if it's going to communicate, especially street theatre, has to speak very directly to people. It cannot sound like something archival or dated. So that's been an interesting exercise. So I've been translating some of those plays, and that was intended for the book. And then I decided that I needed to get back to one of my favorite writers, Mahashweta Devi. Yeah. So I've sort of read, and then I found this quite interesting novel, which again so for a change, Mahashweta, who's usually sort of identified with tribal and sort of rural settings, she has also written very, very powerfully about the urban landscape, and especially the sort of underworld of the city and the middle class of the city, and the clash in the relationships between the two. So this particular novel is very interesting because it looks at a typical upper class, supposedly sealed off community housing estate, like a community existing of a housing estate of very well off, aspirational people. But of course, their entire lives are completely dependent on the local slum, which happens to be sort of a den of the underworld. And how these two worlds then negotiate with each other. And it's all set like a crime thriller. So it's very funny and fast and dark. And so there's a sort of It's
what is
called the Satya Asatya. In Bangla, you would pronounce it better than me. And
Shatto.
it's, Shatto. Yeah. So that's what I'm working on next.
It sounds like a lot.
Unlike Arunava, I find it difficult to work on two translations together. I find it very difficult because if I'm in one kind of state, because it's so different in terms of atmosphere, style, choice of words, everything. So I don't know how Arunava does it actually.
Arunava, how do you do it?
I don't know. I think diminishing returns set in if I work too long on the same text at a go. So for me, it's more to ensure that a translator, I think, it can split themselves into as many persons as they need to.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's nobody at the end of it. Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers admitted to hospital because he no longer knew who he was. Because he was just one of his characters all the time. No, but it's true. He had a mental breakdown where he completely lost his own personality. I think translators are headed there.
I think this is it's a long way away. Don't worry about it. We need a lot more translations happening before you head anywhere in Peter Sellers' direction. But thank you all, Anjum, Arunava, Jerry, thank you very much for your responses. I'm just going to turn to the audience questions. There are some questions for the three of you, which I'm going to open up. The first question is by someone called Augusto Pinto. He says, I'm a translator myself from Konkani into English. One thing that is a huge problem is translating dialects. Dialects in themselves convey meaning about caste, about the location of the speaker, about the culture of that area, and so on. But if one wants to translate into English, my target language, it's difficult to translate this into English. How do you approach this problem?
I've found it very difficult myself because whenever you try to do dialect, you get slapped down by somebody. I remember in I, the Salt Doll, there's a Pathan who's speaking Hindi in a Marathi novel to a woman, and I tried to use a kind of rough English, and all the reviewers picked it up and said, "Why are you doing this? It's just like ridiculously. It's wrong. It sounds wrong. You sound like you're doing a street, kind of like a stage Irish person, like someone talking in a dialect." It's always going to be a problem, especially I think in Cobalt Blue there was there was a moment in which one of the characters asks for a poli as opposed to asking for a chapati. If he had asked for a chapati, it would have meant he was lower caste. Since he asked for a poli, it means that he's Brahmin. And so the mother was very happy to give this young man who's sitting at her table a poli as opposed to a chapati. So, but I did indicate that in a way in the she was said my mother giving him a Brahminical poli with great happiness, something like that. So you try, but most of the time you fail. But that's the way you work.
Yeah, actually, I think Augustus, that's your name, right? Augustus Pinto, right? Well, I think you put your finger on a very, very, very core and sort of difficult problem in translation, because the many layers that there are in language, of which dialect is a good example, they are absolutely indicative. When you hear somebody speak a certain way, you can immediately place that in a certain way, which you find very difficult to do when it all flattens out. And so what Jerry was saying about trying to find innovative ways around that, it's an eternal struggle and challenge for all translation. But that's what keeps translation interesting as well. It's not an easy answer at all. I mean, for example, there's one wonderful story by Maharshita Devi in which the entire pivot of the story is based on the two different usages for the word water. There's jal, and there's pani. And just the fact that the protagonist asks for the water with one word or the other is indicative of the fact that he, or in this case it's a he, comes from across the border and is Muslim, or is a Hindu Bengali. And that gives away a lot of things about the plot. And it's so subtle, and a Bengali reader will get it immediately. Uni jol cheyechilo, pani dilen, there's a sense of immediately understanding the nuanced difference between the two things. But in English, it's so difficult because
Yes.
there's no built-in cultural context for using a different word for what, even if I was to try that. So, these challenges are very much there as part of translation, and one has to accept them and work with them.
I think that's what makes it so much richer. And I mean, it's fascinating, the whole process, therefore, because of all of these sort of intricacies that are built in into your work as a translator. I'll just take the next question. We don't have too much time. It's by Asa Agarwal. Given that there are brilliant work of literature in every language and translating them would make it available to a large audience, I see very few professional courses on translation. Arunava, this is coming straight to you. I know IGNOU offers degree and diploma in translation, but is it enough for the people aspiring to get into translation? And what else would you like to suggest for good translation and not just word by word translation?
I would suggest all of you go out and buy several books on translation right now so that publishers can teach translators better and everyone will be translating more. You haven't bought, any of you, a book in translation in the last 6 months. People don't. In general, they don't. And that's why public translation, no one wants getting into translation. Who wants to get into translation? You want to get into a place where you'll make a lot of money. That's what you want to get into. How do we tell young people, do a translation degree and then do what? Translate manuals, translate government circulars. Is that the translation? That's where you'll make any money.
Yeah.
Literary translation.
And Jerry, even if we don't, it's not always about money. It's very often also about recognition. And that's another area, very few publishers actually give translators the kind of attention they deserve. They're not very often not on the cover page. They're not, they're somewhere hidden somewhere inside after the title page. So
once
that is
Anjum, just go
another
and
thing.
pick up your Borges when you leave this discussion. Pick up the Marquez book next to you and see if the translator's on the cover. Love in the Time of Cholera ka translator kaun tha? Huh? No one knows. All internationally. I think Gillian Wright had suggested it once at a Samanvai festival thing where Arunava and I were also on the panel. She said, take the name of the translator off the cover, take the fact that it's a translation off the cover, and you'll probably sell more copies. Somehow people, it's like subtitled films. People don't want to see subtitled films because that's for the intellectuals. Maybe if you, I don't know, I'm beginning to wonder if it would work. Much as it hurts me to have my name taken off any cover, I have to say, that much ego to hai. Love shove, but ego be.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Arunava. Thanks, Anjum. One last question for you. How does one translate
this? Arunava was meant to answer that question.
Arunava? Oh, yeah. You didn't actually get into it at all. Would you take that?
No, I just wanted to tell you that at Ashoka University, the creative writing course does actually have courses in translation at an entry, intermediate, and advanced level. So, and maybe there'll be a possibility of opening these courses up to people who are not necessarily studying at the university as well. So if we can do something like that, then we'd be happy to have other people coming in.
That's okay. Thank you. My last question there has been deleted, which means we're out of time. So thanks very much, Jerry, Anjum, Arunava. Thank you very much for your time and for this fantastic conversation.